For this project, these are the measurements I'm going to be working with, and because this is a corset, I'm going to be snatching the waist, so I've gone ahead to deduct 4 inches from the actual waist measurement. As you can see, so the actual waist measurement is 30 and I deducted 4 inches from that, and that gave me 26. So I'm going to be using 26 inches for the waist measurement. Now let's move on to the pattern drafting. To proceed, I have gone ahead to mark out my lines, and I'm just going to be labeling them. Right on my pattern, I have the chest line, I also have the bust line, I have my waistline right here, rather the under bust line, then this is my waistline, and I have the full length of this pattern. So guys, the very first thing I will do is to mark a quarter of the bust measurement I'm working on, and I'm going to be placing that on the chest line, just the way we draft our normal basic bodice. On the waistline, I'm going to be marking a quarter of the snatched waist measurement plus 2 inches dart allowance. So on this pattern, I'm using 2 inches for that, while on the full length line, I'm going to be marking the hip measurements without any dart allowance. I'm just going over to connect all of my measurements together. Once that is all done, I'm going to be marking half of the bust span measurement. The bust span is 7, half of that is 3.5. So I'm marking that on the under bust line and also on the bust line, and I'm going to be connecting them together into a straight line. So guys, against this line, I'm going to be taking out my dart. For the under bust, I'm going over to measure my under bust measurement, 7 inches, a quarter of that is 7. Then I'm going to be measuring what I have left. I have 1.5 inches left, which is what I'm going to be using for the dart intake. So 1.5 inches divided by 2 is 0.75, and I'm just going over to take 0.75 inches away from either side of the line that I initially drew, and I'm connecting it to the bust point line. After that, I'm going to be marking half an inch away from the center front of this pattern, and I'm going to be connecting them all together. Once that is all done, I'm going to be getting the midpoint of the shoulder slant. It was about 4.5 inches, so half of that would be about 2.2 inch. I would connect the midpoint to the bust point. After that, I'm going to be marking 2 inches above the chest line, and I'm going to be squaring it down using a dotted line. It is against this line that I'm going to be taking out my dart. So guys, I will just go over and then mark 0.75 inches away from the initial line that I drew from the midpoint of the shoulder slant, and I'm going to be connecting it also to the bust point line. Once that is all done, I went ahead to mark out my bust dart, which is 1 inch. The difference between the front and the back half length of these measurements that I'm working with is 1 inch. And after that, I also went ahead to mark the distance between the bust line and the under bust line. So I just went ahead to mark it all around to form a circle, and this is going to serve as a guide for me when I want to draw my cup. Once I was through, I went ahead to draw the shape of the cup along the side, and using the chest line as a guide, I just went downward and ended the cup at one dart leg. So you can see that the dotted line we marked around the bust area was just to serve as a guide. I also went to the center front region and then drew my cup along the center front, ending it at the other dart leg also. For the upper part, I'm going to be coming down by 0.75 inches, and this is optional, but I felt the shape of the cup was already looking too big, bigger than I wanted it to be. So that was why I marked 0.75 inches below the darts that I had already drawn. And for the other part of the center front, my cup is going to be ending half an inch below the chest line. Your cup could go as deep as you want, or you could just end it at the chest line. So because we already marked half an inch away, I will just square where my cup is ending to the chest, to the center front. Moving on, I'm going to be dividing the waistline into 3 equal parts, and you could make your line slanted to give you that back's waistline effect, but I'm just going to be drawing a straight line. So I'm just going over to divide this waist into 3 equal parts, after which I'm going to be taking out my dart. On the waistline, remember I said I added 2 inches for dart intake, so I'm going to be dividing 2 inches by 4, and that will give me half an inch. So what that means is I'm going to be taking half an inch against each dart line that I've already drawn. So at the end of the day, my total dart intake is going to be 2 inches. I will repeat likewise for the underbust region. The dart there is 1.5 inches, and I'll divide that by 4 and take out whatever value I have against those lines that I have already drawn. After which I'll go ahead and then connect all of my dart points together. Once that is done, the next thing for me is to close my bust dart, and to conveniently close the bust dart, I will need to slash open one dart, which is what I'm going over to do, after which I'll grab my bust dart and then close it. But in the process of closing the dart, I realized that I'm going to be losing some measurements along the chest line area, as you can see. So I'll just measure whatever I'm going to be losing out and replace it back on the side, replace it back to the chest line so that my measurement doesn't become shortened later on, and I'll smoothen it to the waistline. So once this is done, I can now conveniently close my bust dart. So in the process of closing the bust dart, you realize that the cup is now disjointed. So what I just need to do is to grab my marker pen and smoothen the sides of the cup. Moving on, I'm going to be marking half an inch below the bust line. So I'm just grabbing my tape and then marking half an inch below. I'll connect that to where my other darts are originating from on the bust line. These measurements will be taken out later on. Also, I'm going to be marking half an inch below the chest line, and I'll further smoothen my cup to meet up with that measurement that I marked on the chest line. Once I was through with all of that, I just went ahead to take out my cup from the entire pattern. I'm going to be working on this cup later on, but for now let us focus on the other parts of the corset. The first thing I'll do is to label, and I'm giving them numbers 1, 2, 3. It will be my center front, the middle, and the side front. So to move on, I'm going to be marking 2 inches above the hip line just to create a curve around the end of this corset. You could mark yours higher than this, but this is okay for what I want to achieve. And once this is done, I went ahead to take out all of the darts that I have on this pattern. These are all of my pattern sets after taking out the darts along the waist area, but when I match them together, you would realize that pattern 2 and 3 is not matching up along the cup area. One seems to be longer. So what I would just do is to grab my pen and smoothen it and take out any excess that I have, and this will not affect my measurement later on. To style our cup, the very first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking out all the darts that I have on this cup. After that, I would go ahead and label. I have my center front, side front, side front. This part of my cup is going to be eliminated. I'm just going to be grabbing my scissors and I'm going to be cutting that out. But before I go ahead and split the other side front into 2, I will just need to label. So I'll indicate this as up, meaning this part of my cup is facing upward. I'll also do likewise for the upper parts of the cup too, so that I can know which part is facing upward. After then, I'll go ahead and split the side front cup also into 2. So guys, just watch me closely. The next thing I'll do is I'm going to be grabbing my tape and I'll pin the lower part of the cup center front to side front together. So I'm starting with the lower part and I'm grabbing the side front and I'm pinning it together with the center front. I would also do likewise with the upper part of the cup too. For the back, I've gone ahead to mark out my line. This is a chest line, waistline, hip line. So for the back pattern, the pattern is starting from the chest line. There won't be any need to start from the shoulder. On the chest line, I'm going over to mark a quarter of the bust measurement. On the waistline, I'm going over to mark a quarter of the waist measurement for my dart allowance. On the full length line, I'm going over to mark a quarter of the hip measurement, after which I'm going to be connecting all of those points together. In order not to get confused, I'm going to be marking this right here as my center back. So that is my center back. Along the chest line or below the chest line, I'm going to be marking ½ an inch downward, just like I did for the front. And along the center back, I'm going to be coming downwards by 1.5 inch. You could make yours deeper than that, and I'm going to be connecting it together. So guys, on the waistline, I would also go over and then mark out my dart intake, and that is just going to be all for the back. So for the back, I was even wondering why I used 2 inches for that intake for the back. So for you, you can decide to use 1 inch. There's really no point, but I had already gone out to draw out my pattern, so I had no choice but to use it that way. This right here is going to be my center back, and like I did for the front, I'm going over to mark 2 inches above the full length line, and I'll just smoothen the edge of the corset just like I did for the front, and then I'm going to be taking out my patterns. Guys, these are all of the patterns I'm going to be working with. I have the center front, the middle panel, and the side front. I've also got my cups right here, the one that comes below and the one above. I also have my back pattern also, which I'm also going to be working with. I have 2 panels for the back, the center back and the side back. So the cutting and the sewing of this corset is going to be in another tutorial. Thank you so much for watching up until this time. See you guys in my next video. Goodbye.